Lecture 5, Faith and Science. Many atheists and agnostics claim that science provides abundant reasons not to believe in a God. We'll examine a number of these most frequently referred to supposedly scientifically based arguments that attempt to portray faith in God as at best not needed and at worst irrational. The following will be discussed: the Galileo Affair, the scientific method, evolution, modern physics, chance, and human intelligence in relationship to animal intelligence and computer intelligence. The Galileo Affair. Knowing the historical context will help to properly interpret why the Church placed Galileo under house arrest. Galileo's heliocentric model was based on an earlier heliocentric model proposed by Nicholas Copernicus. 1543 is when Copernicus lived. This Polish mathematician, or rather more precisely from the Kingdom of Poland, an astronomer, developed a heliocentric, sun-centered theory in his book On the Revolutions of the Celestial Spheres. His theory was not a brand new theory, for it had been proposed even before the birth of Christ by the Greek mathematician and astronomer Aristarchus. Aristarchus lived around 300 years before the birth of Christ. In contrast to how the Church responded to Galileo, the Church treated Copernicus's heliocentric theory with great respect, as is evident in the foreword to Copernicus's 1492 edition On the Revolution of the Celestial Spheres. In the foreword is a letter by Cardinal Schönberg, written in 1536, and I'll just read a little bit from that letter for you. Cardinal Schönberg says this: Some years ago, and this letter was written in 1436, some years ago word reached me concerning your proficiency, of which everybody constantly spoke. At that time I began to have a very high regard for you, and also to congratulate your contemporaries among you, whom you enjoyed with such great prestige. For I had learned that you had not merely mastered the discoveries of the ancient astronomers uncommonly well, but had also formulated a new cosmology. In it you maintain that the earth moves and the sun occupies the lowest and thus the central place in the universe, that the eighth heaven remains perpetually motionless and fixed, and that together with the elements included in its sphere, the moon, situated between the heavens of Mars and Venus, revolves around the sun in the period of a year. I've also learned that you have written an exposition of this whole system of astronomy, and have computed the planetary motions and set them down in tables, to the greatest admiration of all. Therefore, with utmost earnestness, I entreat you, most learned sir, unless I inconvenience you, to communicate this discovery of yours to scholars, and at the earliest possible moment to send me your writings on the sphere of the universe, together with the tables and whatever else you have that is relevant to this subject. Why did the Church praise Copernicus and punish Galileo? The answer is that, unlike Galileo, Copernicus did not insist on presenting the heliocentric theory as proven, but instead cautiously presented this theory as only a possible explanation that needed further verification. Currently, we have abundant evidence that verifies the heliocentric theory, but such evidence was lacking both at the times of Copernicus and at the times of Galileo. Another explanation is due to the differing styles of Copernicus and Galileo. Copernicus was respectful to church authority, while Galileo mocked church authority. In his book, Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, Galileo even poked fun at Pope Urban VIII by having the character Simplicio, which means simpleton in English, speak the very words the Pope once spoke. Finally, due to the Protestant reformers' tendency to literally interpret scripture passages that phenomenologically describe the sun rotating around the earth, the Church did not want to lend support to the heliocentric theory until there was greater verification for the theory. For these and other reasons, the Church brought Galileo to trial, accused him of heresy, required him to recant, and then placed him under house arrest. In criticizing the Church's actions towards Galileo, many forget that the historical context at the time of Galileo differed significantly from ours. In pointing this out, Cardinal Ratzinger in 1990 February 15th speech at the Sapienza University of Rome stated, "The Church at the time of Galileo kept much more closely to reason than Galileo himself, and she took into consideration the ethical and social consequences of Galileo's teaching too. Her verdict against Galileo was rational and just, and the revision of this verdict can be justified only on the grounds of what is politically opportune." With hindsight gained from history, many in the Church, including those in the highest office, wish that the Church was less harsh in punishing Galileo. Taking our current historical perspective in account, on October 31st, 1992, Pope John Paul II expressed remorse for the Church's punishment of Galileo. The scientific method. The English philosopher and scientist Francis Bacon, he lived from 1561 to 1626, greatly contributed to what is now called the scientific method. His method promoted the careful analysis of sensory data obtained by experimentation in order to establish degrees of certainty. A simplified description of how scientists currently obtain various degrees of certainty is as follows. First, find a natural phenomenon to be accounted for. 2. Frame hypothesis that, if true, would account for the phenomenon in question. 3. Derive a directly observable result from the hypothesis given a set of initial conditions. 4. Set up an experiment that brings about those initial conditions and check to see if the observable result occurs. 5. If the observable result does not occur, reject the hypothesis deductively, go back to steps 2 and frame a new hypothesis. 6. If the observable result does occur, the hypothesis receives inductive support, then go back to step 3 and test again to verify. Madrid observes that nowhere in the scientific method is a particular philosophy adopted. Just as a recipe book can be followed with equal results by a materialist and by a Platonist, so too can the scientific method be followed by people of diverse philosophical assumptions. A recipe and a method is not the same as a philosophy. Unfortunately, when it comes to the scientific method, some people erroneously assume that the scientific method is necessarily supportive of philosophical materialism. This is not the case, since as a method it neither affirms or denies a particular philosophical approach. In addition, the scientific method can only be applied to the material observable world. It cannot be applied to God and other immaterial realities, since modern science is limited to studying physical matter. The scientific method's attempt to falsify its starting hypothesis also means that it only deals with varying degrees of probability and not with certainties. The method always remains open to exceptions being discovered, and if discovered, to return to the hypothesis in order to either modify or reject it. The inherent skepticism within this method means that according to this method of acquiring knowledge, simply because something has been discovered does not mean it does not exist. As pithily explained by Father Robert Pitzer, a scientist cannot know what he doesn't know until he knows it. Once he knows something he did not previously know, the scientific method can be used once again to discover more knowledge that was previously not known. Logically, therefore, the scientific method can neither disprove or prove with certainty that God exists, since, as evident in the above steps, scientific findings are always subject to being modified and re-examined. This is because science is based on degrees of probability, not on certainty, for it is primarily an inductive science based on probabilities and on particular observations, and not a deductive science based on certain conclusions that follow certain premises. Furthermore, adds Spitzer, a scientist cannot use evidence within the universe to disprove existence of something outside the universe. Evolution. As cautiously presented by the Catholic International Theological Commission in Communion and Stewardship, human persons created in the image of God, around 15 billion years ago, the universe exploded into existence. Gradually, The exploding particles coalesced into galaxies and stars. Then, around 10 billion years ago, the first planets were formed. Planet Earth and its solar system was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. Around 3.5 billion years ago, the first living organisms evolved on planet Earth. According to the consensus of biologists, all living organisms on Earth are descendants of this first living organism. About 150,000 years ago, the Homo Sapiens, the first man and woman, evolved out of hominids. This Catholic International Theological Commission explanation of man's origin is based on evolutionary theory. According to this theory, as outlined above, around 150,000 years ago, a hominid called the Homo sapiens emerged out of ape-like creatures called hominids. In Latin, Homo sapiens means wise men. They received this name because of their high degree of intelligence in comparison with other hominids. As explained by Baglow, the symbolic artifacts of the Homo sapiens from around 45,000 to 70,000 years ago demonstrate that because of their intelligence, that they differed in kind and not simply in degree from their ancestors. Some of the artifacts the Homo sapiens left behind indicate they were developing language, which in turn indicate that they had capacity to form universal concepts. The ability to form universal concepts requires the capacity to spiritually transcend the material world, including the particular matter of the brain, in order to judge it. This unique capacity of the first man and first woman to transcend the material world cannot come from the material world, since the material world is individualized and not universal. Nothing can give that which it does not have. Since the capacity to reason did not come from themselves or from biological evolution, it is highly reasonable to conclude that it came as a gift from outside the physical world from God. And this is precisely what the Catholic Church teaches. According to the Catholic Church, the human immaterial soul with its capacity to transcend the material world is not a product of biological evolution, but rather is given to man by God in a special act of creation. In this special creation called ensoulment, God intervened in history by creating and infusing two spiritual souls into the first man and first woman. Findings in modern genetics have even roughly identified the first man and first woman by tracing every human being's genetics materials to but only one male and one female. As he did with Adam and Eve, at the conception of every human being, God continues his special intervention by creating an immaterial soul and infusing this soul into the human life that is developing within the womb of the mother. Modern physics, gravity, and a multi-universe. The noted physicist Stephen Hawking has famously claimed that the universe could have originated from nothing. He wrote, "Because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing. Spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, why the universe exists, why we exist. It is not necessary to invoke God to light the blue touch paper and set the universe going." The Jesuit Robert Spitzer counters Hawking's assertion by pointing out that this claim betrays Hawking's fundamental assumption about the universe, namely that it came from nothing. Hawking, explains Spitzer, can only hold this assumption if, quote, he believes that there are reasons for thinking the universe had a beginning. In deducing this, Spitzer states, if Dr. Hawking does not believe that there is any reason to think that the universe had a beginning, then why does he even bother to speculate about how the universe could spontaneously create itself from nothing? Now, once it is accepted that the universe had a beginning, then who or what was responsible for the beginning of the universe? This question can only be answered by appealing to a non-material reality that is not the subject matter of physics. Physics cannot study nothing, since nothing has no physical properties. Metaphysics, which is beyond or after physics, can reflect on the possibility of nothingness, and in so doing conclude there must have been something some necessary intelligent being that created the universe out of nothing, since nothing comes from nothing. Hawking, however, confuses nothing with something physical by identifying it with the law of gravity. But the law of gravity is something, is not nothing. Is gravity nothing? Of course not, Spitzer argues. For it has a specific constant associated with it and specific characteristics, and it has specific effects on mass energy and even on space-time itself. This is a very curious definition of nothing. Therefore, Dr. Hawking's phrase should be restated to say something like, because there is a law such as gravity, the universe has unfolded and developed, but what must be avoided are the rest of the statements. Can and will create itself from nothing, and spontaneous creation is the reason there is something rather than nothing, etc. Now, if we rephrase Dr. Hawking's statement in the above fashion, then he has clearly not explained why there is something rather than nothing. He has only explained that something comes from something, i.e., the universe from physical laws such as the law of gravity, which is something. End of quote of Father Spitzer. Hawking does not only appeal to the laws of gravity in order to dismiss the needs of a creating God, but also appeals to the multi-universe theory. In an article first published in the Washington Times, Bruce L. Gordon, Associate Professor of Science and Mathematics at King's College, argues against Hawking's belief in the multi-universe theory. Hawking relies on this theory in order to explain the astonishing fine-tuning of the universe. From a Catholic perspective, relying on reason, the fine-tuning of the universe indicates the need of an intelligent mind who established precisely the right conditions for life, especially human life, to be possible. In countering Hawking's argument, Gordon writes, in the machinations of multiverse cosmology, to explain cosmological fine-tuning, cosmic inflation is invoked to explain why our universe is so flat and its background radiation so uniform. All possible solutions of string theory are invoked to explain the incredible fine-tuning of the cosmological constant. But the evidence for cosmic inflation is both thin and equivocal. The evidence for string theory and its extension, M theory, is non-existent. And the idea that conjoining them demonstrates that we live in a multiverse of bubble universes with different laws and constants is a mathematical fantasy. What is worse, multiplying without limit the opportunities for any event to happen in the context of a multiverse where it is alleged that anything can spontaneously jump into existence without cause produces a situation at which no absurdity is beyond the pale. For instance, we find multiverse cosmologists debating the Boltzmann brain problem. In the most reasonable models for a multiverse, it is measurably more likely that our consciousness is associated with a brain that has spontaneously fluctuated into existence in the quantum vacuum than it is that we have parents and exist in an orderly universe with a 13.7 billion years history. This is absurd. The multiverse hypothesis is therefore falsified because it renders false what we know to be true about ourselves. Clearly, embracing the multiverse idea entails a nihilistic irrationality that destroys the very possibility of science. Universes do not spontaneously create on the basis of abstract mathematical descriptions, nor does the fantasy of a limitless multiverse trump the explanatory power of transcendent intelligent design. What Mr. Hawking's contrary assertions show is that mathematical savants can sometimes be mathematical simpletons. End of quote. The Boltzmann brain that Gordon refers to is a hypothetical self-conscious being which supposedly arose out of an original chaos of random fluctuations. This concept was named after the physicist Ludwig Boltzmann. He lived from 1844 to 1906. And Boltzmann argued that the universe originated from random fluctuations. Chance. Due to the advent of quantum physics, randomness or chance is frequently appealed to in arguments that reject God. Acknowledging, however, the existence of chance and randomness is not contrary to at the same time believing in an intelligent creator. At first, they may seem to be contradictory. Is not randomness contrary to an intelligent design? How can chance be reflective of God's reason reflected in what he has created? Christopher Baglow answers these questions in three ways. First, he demonstrates that in some ways chance is in the eye of the beholder. For example, if I know the exact order of every card in a deck prior to dealing it, then from my perspective, handing out the cards is not chance, but from the perspective of those receiving the cards, it is. Now, this way of understanding how chance fits into God's providential designs is not sufficient. It makes chance appear completely fictional. Chance does actually exist and, along with man's free will, coexists with God's omniscience. Ultimately, how chance, freedom, and providence and God's ability to know everything in advance relate to one another is a mystery. Since it is mysterious, a variety of explanations offering different perspectives will help our finite minds to gain insight into this paradox. Baglow, consequently, presents two other explanations. First, he shows how the presence of randomness does not necessarily reflect a lack of intelligent order, but may actually be intelligently willed in order to serve a greater order. For example, even though the random way of distributing fish food by throwing it in a tank does not mean that my choice to throw the fish food in the tank was random. Second, if there were no randomness chance, then the world would only have a single pattern and direction, similar to auto-programming a destination on a missile. Unless the missile is shot down or there is a program failure, it will reach its destination. This is because the missile is not free, unlike humans, and analogously, that is similar and with a difference to random aspects of creation. Human, animals, and even creation itself are all free in various degrees and kinds, precisely because God allows an element of randomness and chance to coexist with his intelligent providential plans reflected in nature. These aspects reflect the unconditional freedom of their creator. By directing our attention to the macro level of physics, Baglow complements his emphasis on chance at the micro level. Mathematicians and physicists, including the English mathematical physicist Roger Penrose, have demonstrated that the universe is so delicately fine-tuned to support the existence of life that it is more reasonable to conclude that it was a product of intelligent design than a result of mere chance. This is because the odds that the universe would have occurred in a manner that supports life, above all human life, are overwhelming against this fine-tuning occurring by chance. Atheists counter this argument by asserting that there may exist an infinite number of undetectable universes caused by chance, of which ours is one of the few, or only one that has life. This argument is very weak, since there's no evidence that these universes exist, and even if they do exist, it still does not answer the question of what or who caused them to exist. With respect to the multi-universes theory, Father Spitzer adds the following. Although the principle that the simpler, more elegant, and non-redundant explanations are to be preferred is not scientifically provable and only serves as a guide to scientists, it, nonetheless, is repeatedly observed in nature. Nature has a pronounced tendency to be simple and not bloated or contradictory. The multi-universe theory, though, is a complex and convoluted explanation. In addition, the multi-universe theory does not provide an answer to what caused the fine-tuning of the multi-universe. For a multi-universe to exist, there has to be an initial condition that was highly fine-tuned for it to form. In addition, for a multi-universe to continue existing, there needs to be constant, ongoing fine-tuning in order to prevent multi-universes from clashing into and destroying one another. Since nothing comes from nothing, there must be, even with a multi-universe, something or someone who, as uncaused or cause, brought forth the effects of creation. In arguing for the necessity of an uncaused, completely self-sufficient first cause of the universe, Bishop Barron explains that matter only exists in forms that are filled with potentiality to be formed in other ways. This reality of matter as necessarily in a form leads to the question, why is matter in this form and not in another? For example, why is a podium in this form and not in another form? It is in this particular form because all sorts of causes came together in order for this configuration of matter to occur. Since matter necessarily depends on causes in order to exist, it leads to another question of who caused matter. Matter could not have caused itself, since it is by nature dependent on causes for it to be in forms. Therefore, some reality that is not contingent on anything else must exist that is the cause. In other words, this non-contingent being is being itself, ipsum esse, God who created out of nothing. Human intelligence, animal intelligence, and computer intelligence. It has just been explained how a version of evolutionary theory can be fully consistent with the Catholic faith. Sometimes, though, people approach evolutionary theory and religious faith in a creating God from an either-or stance. According to this understanding, if evolutionary theory is correct, then God does not exist. Those who see evolutionary theory as a replacement explanation for the origin of the universe view human beings as merely highly evolved animals, whose intelligence only differs in degrees and not in kind from animal intelligence. In his book Faith, Science and Reason, Theology and the Cutting Edge, Baglow demonstrates how unreasonable this atheistic assumption is. Baglow argues that what appears to be rationality in animals is only the result of their highly tuned sense perception. For example, tests done on the German horse dubbed Clever Hans demonstrated that the horse's apparent ability to solve math problems was not because the horse was solving math problems, but rather was due to the horse responding to its keeper's reaction of relaxing when the horse had tapped out the right number of times to a mathematical problem. The horse was not able to solve a single math problem when the possibility of the keeper unintentionally cueing the horse was eliminated by either blindfolding the horse or by selecting a person who did not know the answer to ask the horse a math question. Baglow also points out that the supposed high degree of animal intelligence observed in lab settings at the coaxing of trainers has never spontaneously occurred in the wild. How does our intelligence differ in kind from animal intelligence? Baglow answers this by going through 5 human qualities that distinguish human intelligence from animal intelligence. These 5 qualities are self-consciousness, and I quote from him, self-consciousness, awareness of time, appreciation of the beautiful, a sense of morality and responsibility, and the development of culture, end of quote. The first quality, self-consciousness, is our ability to be self-aware. As a self-aware being, I can transcend myself by viewing myself as a subject. This ability is due to the human ability of abstraction that we've already gone through, physical, mathematical, and metaphysical. The second quality, our awareness of time, is unique since no evidence has been found that indicates that animals have created a way of measuring time, such as using a calendar. Our awareness of time is due to our ability to abstract mathematically. As explained previously, mathematical abstractions refer to our ability to understand universal concepts, circles, squares, triangles, that are applicable to all physical things and not just to a certain kind of thing, such as a certain type of tree or dog. The third quality, our appreciation of beauty, is evident even in Stone Age tools. These ancient tools were not made only for functional reasons, but also were made in an aesthetically pleasing manner. Due to our human ability to abstract metaphysically, we can appreciate beauty that is reflective of all things and also transcends the created world, for it points to the source of all beauty, who is God. The fourth quality, our sense of morality and responsibility, is also due to our ability to abstract in a metaphysical manner, but in this case with respect to goodness and not to beauty. This goodness is not, borrowing Dietrich von Hildebrand, simply subjectively satisfying but also objectively fulfilling. Animals pursue the good insofar as it is subjectively satisfying. Humans, though, can pursue the good in a moral sense insofar as it is objectively fulfilling. An example of something merely subjectively satisfying is eating a hamburger or eating an ice cream. An example of something objectively fulfilling is an encounter of Christ through prayerful meditation on Christ crucified on the cross. When meditating on the love of Christ, one can experience our disordered love being rearranged and reordered in accordance with the love of Christ. And in that process, we begin to experience greater and deeper peace. The fifth quality, development of culture, is evident in the thousands of human cultures. that, although experiencing change and development, also are passed on as a unifying principle from one generation to the next. In contrast, animals only learn from their own species or from other species by mirroring the behavior of what they see. In arguing how computer intelligence also differs in kind and not simply in degree from human intelligence, Baglow again relies on the 3 degrees of abstraction. The mathematician Kurt Gödel has convincingly demonstrated a computer can only solve problems by following a set rules created by a programmer. Since computers are restricted by these rules, they cannot act beyond or think about these rules. For example, when programmed to do so, a computer can rapidly add up millions of numbers in a very short time. However, it cannot think about the meaning of 0 and 1 in an objective manner, since it cannot abstract mathematically. Due to our ability to abstract physically, mathematically, and metaphysically, we are not trapped by rules that others create. Instead, we can think about the rules themselves, and if we choose to do so, modify them, change them, and discover new rules. Finally, following the basic Thomistic principle that grace builds on nature, Baglow argues that the existence of human freedom is supported by the modern quantum theory. According to quantum theory, the universe on the subatomic level is not deterministic but probabilistic. If everything, even down to the minutest subatomic particles of electrons, protons, neutrons, quarks, inflexibly followed predetermined laws, then how could the human soul, representing freedom, interact with the human mind, which in this case would be completely determined down to the subatomic level? The probabilistic and non-deterministic aspect of matter is highly fitting for non-deterministic human freedom to be rooted in and built upon. God bless.